dialogue. And one of the things I've appreciated about Wayne as I've gotten to know him was, I remember when he came up, and I think it was a Friday night and a Saturday gathering times, and then you spoke on that Sunday, and he told me, he said, I don't know if you would use this word, Wayne, like to anymore, but it's just not your preference to speak to in kind of a large group gatherings per se, more doing it conversational style with respect to the way Jesus did it, if I recall. And that's always been stuck in my head, and it's definitely been more like that in this kind of virtual connection technology world where you can't really gather, at least not in Canada as much. And having that small group world, even though, you spoke, that church you were co-pastoring or pastoring 5,000 people, et cetera, you had in your journey. I'm just going to read something to get us going here, because I'm
5,000 people. I never saw 5,000 people. It wasn't that big.
Right, something like that. I love.
Not even close.
Close, not even close. But I love what Angela posted on the bio, and I think she took it off your website here. But it says, I consider myself a brother on a journey, willing to share what God has given to me in any way that will help others discover the joy of life in Him. And you go into, I've been on this lifelong journey to sort out what it means to live loved by the Father and of our Lord Jesus Christ, and enjoy helping others find traction on that journey as well. And then you go on, it says, finding the joy of being loved by Him, we also discover how to love others, not only fellow members of the family, of His family in the world, but also how to be a better vessel for God's compassion to find its way to those who don't know Him yet. That one really strikes me in this time and we're living in now, where there's a lot of opinions, and I can't remember who said it, everybody's got them and they're like armpits, they smell. But in terms of love has a unique fragrance to it, Yep. But I have some quotes that, when you listen to somebody a few times or different places, or you pick up, and then certain ones are written in your heart. We've talked about your heart in a sense as a better memory than your head. And the things that are written in you last forever. And in lots of ways, I just want to encourage Wayne and just bless you tonight, Wayne, and just honor you that, I think you talk about the first 42 years of your life, you lived with a particular version of the gospel, and then everything shifts. And one of those people was his name Kevin? Was that the gentleman in Australia?
Kevin Smith from Australia.
Yeah. And I kept some of that blog you sent out that with some of the things you picked up from that connection with him. And I remember thinking these things were written in your heart when he said those things. You know what kind of church you could build with fear, if you will. What would it look like to build one from trust? And along the way, here's a couple of quotes that Wayne has said that they really impacted me. One was, you can't trust until your heart feels safe. And you said that in a context of, if someone asks you to trust them, hang on, you can't trust until your heart feels safe enough to trust. And my God, why does He pursue us in a way to win us that we feel safe enough that we can trust Him, like that kind of scenario. And one of the things you put in that last chapter of He Loves Me was, after a lot of people started tracking you down, and how do you get there, and how do you live in this, and whoa, hang on, this is going to be a process. And it's the first time I think I read someone talk about the heart with knots in it, that it takes a while for Him to start unwrapping and unraveling those knots, and whether they're religious knots or whatever they are. And there's a few more, like I won't go on those, but I think one of the statements you've said a few times, you would say it so fast, it took me 3 times to try and see if I could write it down, but it'd be, what is it about your love, God, that I don't know, that if I did know? And you do it with such, say the statement, because I'll goof it up.
Well, it depends on what I'm praying about. Usually it's if I'm talking about, times when I feel anxious or afraid of what's coming, to say, God, what is it about your love I don't know, that if I knew it, I would be at rest in you, in spite of what's going to happen? Or if it's having difficulty loving somebody, it's, God, what is it that I don't know about you and them that if I knew it, I would love them the way you love them. And so that prayer takes a lot of different forms.
Yeah. Oh, it's powerful. My just recently I was driving back from a city, had a 4-hour drive, and someone had passed me along have you listened to Wayne's latest podcast is it Tuesday nights you were doing them on the glory? And I was able to listen to them in a row, like back to back to back, like catching up on a bunch of them. And I was telling Wayne this earlier when we talked a few days back, and I said, I heard it. I heard a shift in his voice. I don't know if it's I don't know if it's age or if it's just the reality.
Hey.
I get to say that now. I'm getting a grayer beard, but
Okay.
but I was really it really struck me that, and most of the people that I know on this screen, on these screens, have come to an awareness of this journey. I call it an adventure. This realization that we are changing without, in a sense, us doing it to ourselves, obviously, and sometimes we don't even know it until people remind us of that. And I just want to, Wayne, just listening to, even last week, we got to reconnect on a call like this in England. And the way you answered Richard Jones's question with respect to what was going on in the world with respect to, not in the world, but just in the sense of how fear and love, the opposites, and how social scientists were talking about how that you can actually see that connected to our brains in that sense, like our amygdala and our frontal cortex. I'm thinking all of that might come out tonight or may not, but I'm going to turn it over to you a bit. And here, just a little bit of housekeeping would be, if you are able, you can put it on speaker view and you can just see him. It's always less distractional if you're listening to the speaker face to face versus screening through all the screens, but unless you're the speaker, it's better to look at everybody.
That's what I would think.
And then I sometimes like looking at people's reactions too, but the other part is it's going to be dialogue-ish in ways. And I know Wayne likes to do that, and I'll let him kind of, when there's moments of that. And Angela, who's on screen here somewhere. Angela, why don't you wave so for those who can see you. And she kind of is one of these piece de resistance moderators. You can send questions to her on the chat. We might, if it gets where we can put up a hand and wave and do it live, we can do that too. But we'll see where it goes. And welcome, everybody. Welcome to this part of the world. You can't even say a city anymore. You can't even say a country, because there's people on here from all sorts of countries and different places. So, take her away, Wayne. Just tell us what you're feeling. Tell us what you're going through, and we're just so grateful you've been up here.
Oh, it's great you'd invite me, Brent, come along and see some familiar faces, and kind of have some of that renewed in my heart from having met some of you and been involved with some of you. A couple of you came on a Israel trip I did, so that's always kind of fun to reconnect with folks. I don't really have much of an agenda tonight at all, so I'm really open to kind of wonder where you guys want to wander. If you want to ask what I'm thinking about these days or what's going on in my life, obviously we're caught up in a very dramatic time here at home politically, and that has overlays in terms of spirituality and what people perceive God's doing in the world. And there's as much conflict between Christian camps as there ever has been in America over how we see the election, how we see history unfolding in the US. And so it's an incredibly weird time. I don't know where this journey's leading. I was telling people today, because I feel like God has kind of warned me that something's coming, and for me to be aware of it. And but I don't know what that something is or how it's coming. And it's not just something I felt internally. I have a number of people who've had visions or dreams or feel like God put something on their heart for me, and they all kind of dovetail together pretty closely. It kind of pretends that something is coming that God's going to want me to be involved in. So I told a group of people that I pray with the other day, I kind of feel like Garden of Gethsemane time, but not Jesus's experience in the garden. Jesus knew it was coming and knew how desperately he needed the Father to help him get through what the next 24 hours were going to be for him. I feel more like Peter in that garden. I have no idea what's coming. And Jesus is kind of saying, why don't you watch and pray with me? Why don't you? And I wonder how different Peter's experience would have been going through the trial, the cross, if he would have been able to spend some time with Jesus in prayer and get his heart settled. So that's kind of where I'm at personally, is how do I settle my heart inside his work? How can I be prepared to recognize when things come, his voice, as opposed from my preference, and not be confused that my preference, even my well thought out, unselfish preference, may not be at all the road God's called me down. I've got a friend from South Africa. We were talking the other day, and he was talking about a gate. And through this gate was everything he's ever wanted. It's this big fair and it's colors and people, and it was everything spiritually he wanted. It's not selfish, indulgent stuff, just everything he'd wanted spiritually. And as he got to the gate, there's actually no gate there, it was just an entryway. And as he got to it, just had a sign on it, says no entry. And he went, no entry? What does that mean? This was a vision he was having. And God says, you see that? Everything in there is everything you've ever wanted. But I don't have that for you. I want you to go here. And next to the gate was this little pathway. And he didn't want to go down that pathway because it was just like, what? That's all the fun stuff over there. This is just what? A dirt trail goes off in the woods. I don't know where that goes. But God just told him that I want you to do that. Now, honestly, when he told me that story, and I loved it, and he said eventually that path was the valley of love, to go to find out what love was really about. And he's learned some amazing things that have even challenged my heart as I've talked to him. He's just exploded some things in my thinking that's been awesome. But when I heard him share that, I think that's often true. It's almost always been true of my journey. There's this thing in front of me that looks like, oh yeah, that's got to be God. That's awesome. That's great. I want to go there. And yet almost always the path to what's next in God has not been the broad road. It's not been going what looks like would be everybody's idea of this must be God. It's awesome to go down a road less traveled into a life of learning to live loved. And as my friend from South Africa describes it, learn to live in the freedom from the pain of self-centered living, which I think is just a great expression. So I've been reading Isaiah a lot, which I think has a lot of parallels to where the U.S. is these days. It's been particularly enlightening to me. And then I finished that a few days ago, and I said, God, what's next? Which I always do when I finish a book in the Bible. It's always like, okay, God, what's next? And mostly I don't have any direction about that. But I felt really specifically drawn to Hosea. And Hosea, if you don't know, poor guy, he had the worst prophetic calling of any human being on the planet. Go marry a prostitute who's going to be unfaithful to you and shred your heart. And that you're going to be a living parable of my love for Israel and Israel's faithlessness to me. That's his call. And I hurt whenever I think of Hosea. But there's some wonderful things in Isaiah. We get to chapter 3. It's just what God says to him is, okay, start over and love. Love the one who's been unfaithful to you. Love the one who's hurt you. I want you to start all over and just love. And then as that kind of unwinds in chapter 3, there's a part where it says, and he talks about Israel, and he said Israel is going to go through a very, very painful time. They're going to lose their moorings. They're going to be in pain. They're going to feel unprotected. It goes through a whole lot of things. And then he said, but when they get to the end of it, they will return to me. They'll come back and they'll find their reverence again for me. And he said, they've got to go down this road until they can end the story with love. That's what it says in the Message. Till they find the end of the story of love. That this is all about love. This is all about God finding Israel getting lost. And so, yeah, some difficult times are coming, but I'm going to be in them for you because I need to end your story with love. And where you're headed right now isn't going to get you there. So that's a lot of what I've been thinking. It affects politically, the division, even among my friends who have a certain way of seeing the world. And if you don't see the world their way, they won't talk to you anymore, which is just sad to me. People are so defensive. I used the phrase in a thing recently, deluded. People who see the world in either somebody's 100% right or they're 100% wrong. And who of us is either of those two things, right? We're all a mix. We see some things and then we're confused about some things. And how God liberates us from our delusions to let us live more peaceably in Him. So that's personally, I'm in the middle of I don't know what. My heart, I'm more encouraged and hopeful than I've ever been. I think I'm very hopeful that God's got something coming. I also am very convinced I have no idea what that is. So I'm just keeping my heart on standby and see when He nudges where I'll go. So yeah, somebody's drawing attention to Sarah's garden. Yeah, that's not today, by the way. That's a picture, but that's springtime in the garden. The garden has a different look. This is Sarah's pride and joy back here. This is her sacred space. She times gets overwhelmed with tears there that God allows her to have a space that beautiful in the world, and she gets to paint with flowers in that space. So
Yeah. When I look
I
at
get
the
to
garden,
meditate in that space, so that's cool.
yeah. You told the story last time, and I'm going to come back to what you were saying before, Wayne. But you told the story. I think of Sarah when she used to kick the dogs out for ripping up her flowers, and then later on there was the puppy you saw ripping up the flowers. Can you tell that story?
It's one of my favorite stories ever. This is the main part of Sarah's garden, where all the real pretty stuff is. But it's originally when we started this, she was going to garden there because that's water costs a lot of money here in Southern California. So let's contain the gardening to this space. And since she's grown out of it, she's sprawled all. I get another picture somewhere. I can show you of the whiter garden, but I just left on a trip, and this is the last dog we got. So this is like 4 years ago because the dog's 4 years old. But we'd gotten a new dog, and it was a lab, a yellow lab golden retriever mix, and we got it pretty quickly. Dog died when I was on a trip, so when I came home, and I had a lot of trips kind of back to back, and I told Sarah, "How soon do you want to get a dog?" And she goes, "Yesterday." So I was home only for a few days, but we found a dog and got this pup. I left again and I came back in my office from my study. I overlook this garden. I see it from a second floor window. And I saw her. I've been back a few days and I was working in the study and I looked out and I see Sarah walk into her garden, and I know how much it means to her. So my heart always, when I see Sarah go to the garden, my heart just, I'm excited. I'm grateful for her. I don't want to be out there. I grew up on a farm, man. I don't like being in the dirt. I don't like pulling weeds. I prune stuff for her, but mostly to me that's not relaxation. For Sarah, it's her happy place. So I see her going out there, and then I notice a few minutes later I'm looking down, and over one of these brick pathways I see dirt being thrown across the pathway. So I'm like, what's going on down there? Looking, and sure enough, it's that new puppy who's in one of these spots in the garden where Sarah just planted some new set of flowers, and that puppy's there just pitching out flowers and dirt and over the walkway, and it's just making a mess. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness. And Sarah's clearing the back of the garden, so I don't think she knows what's going on. This is going to be fun. I'm going to go down and see how this sorts out. So I walk outside and walk past the puppy, who looks at me just like you can imagine, a little 10-week-old puppy, just dirt everywhere and shreds of flowers, and just smiling like, look at me, man, this is so awesome. And I just looked at her and I said, you are so dead. You have no idea how dead you are. You just have no idea. And she's just digging and throwing. And so I said, hey, Sarah. She said, yeah. I said, you know what's going on over here? She said, it was Zoe. And I said, yeah, it was Zoe. She said, yeah, I know. I said, what do you know? She's digging a little bit. I said, digging a little bit, you could bury a small sized child in this hole. I mean, she's got quite an excavation going on. And so Sarah really? And she looks over, and I kind of walk back to her by then. And yeah, dog's making a mess, man. I said, what's going on? And she said, you know what? She said, I've noticed that whenever I come to my garden, my dogs don't come with me. I want them to. I call them to come, and they don't come, or if they come, they don't stay. And she said, I wonder if it's because when they first come to the garden, I'm so worried about disciplining them that for them, the garden is not a fun place to be. And so I've decided with this one, she came up with this all on her own while I'm out traveling somewhere. She said, I've decided with this one, I'm going to let her do whatever she wants to in the garden for the first year. She can do whatever she wants. And because I want her to enjoy me in the garden. And then a year from now, I'm going to go back and help her learn how to be in the garden without being destructive. And I thought, wow, this sounds godly to me. This sounds like God's heart for us. I mean, God, we start laying down the rules for people before they ever got a taste of, man, I'm loved by this God. And so that's what Sarah did. And I don't know if she ever dug the garden up quite like that again. I said, well, what about that space? You just planted new flowers there. Sarah said, I'll plant some more flowers. Doesn't matter. She said, she's got it all nice and excavated now. And I said, oh, it's yeah, the dirt's really, you don't need a rototiller there. She said, I can fix that in 10 minutes. I can sweep that sidewalk and put new flowers in there. And she said, I want the dog to love being with me. And to this day, 4 years old, every time I see her going to the garden, there's this 90-pound dog right behind her, tail wagging. That dog loves being in the garden with Sarah. And as far as I know, it hasn't been destructive again, other than that first year. There was a couple of things. After that, she just learned to be in the garden and do the things that Sarah enjoys in the garden. So that's a great parable. If we could give people a chance to be loved by God and enjoy him, then he would get the chance to change them instead of us trying to change them first. Is that the story you meant?
Yeah, it is. That it just came to me, and I think part of it is we lead into a question that when you think of the parent, penalizing through fear to stop doing something, and then they are never grow close. And I know that you mentioned this in a call on the England call, and I thought it was great. It was an answer to, I don't know if you remember the question that was asked to you, Wayne, but it was in the whole sense of what's going on in the world, and specifically in democratic societies where it appears that this polarization, like you just referring to, is getting, it's either people, if you don't agree with me, then they don't want to be connected. And then there's this reality of what love is about that is beyond, if you will, the differences. And I know you wrote a book on that last year about the language to bridge that. And I'm just encouraging people, if you have questions, not specifically related at points of what's going on, but about what you're sensing is, please feel free to come forward with them. But Wayne, you rocked my world. And when you answered the question, you said, well, really, what's really going on? A lot of the gospel was sown in an atmosphere of fear, and specifically in North America. And so we talked about this personally, but when people get overwhelmed with information, they tend to go back to older paradigms on how they perceive things. And fear is a filter that does a lot of that. And then you were talking that you've been talking to some social scientists. So could you just share a little bit about that, what you've seen, and how fear versus love is kind of really what's going on at the highest level, if you want to put it that way? Or
I don't know where to break into the story, because it's been going on a long time. A couple of years ago, a friend of mine had a vision, and we talked about it on the podcast at the God Journey. He had a vision of two spirit beings on top of a topographical map of the United States, and they were beginning to dance together. And as they danced, this music began to rise out of, he said, out of hell, out of the pit. But the music was the same beat and the same pacing as like a Hillsong worship song. He said it wasn't Hillsong, but it was a counterfeit. It was the enemy providing this music that these spirits began to dance to, and one was the spirit of religion and the other was the spirit of politics. And as they began to dance, many believers from the United States were joining in that dance. They thought this was a godly thing. They were kind of deluded into thinking this was 2 years ago. And I've watched over the last 2.5 years as that has kind of unfolded. The spirit of religion and the spirit of politics. And I was discussing this with someone who's really not necessarily a deep believer, or particularly a living loved kind of, in that vein of things, more of a traditional denominational kind of, but he's a friend, he's a good friend. And we were talking about, not that specifically, we were talking about something else. And he asked me, he said, do you know that research they did a few years back about where we process political thought in the brain? And I, no, what are you talking about? And he sent me a bunch of links, and I read through them. And what it was saying was they were trying to figure out, social scientists in America, why when somebody has a deep political conviction and you bring up some facts that might alter that perception, how they will dismiss the fact to hold to their perception. That our political convictions are stronger than our desire to know what's true. And it's both true, both left and right. It's not just unique to people on the right. It's both. When you're fixated on your way of viewing the world politically, nothing else gets through that. Nothing changes, nothing alters it. And that while they were doing that research, he said they also found out we process religion in the same part of the brain, which is the amygdala, or what's often called the reptile brain, because it's the oldest part of our brain. If you're an evolutionist, and I'm not, but it's a more primitive part. And what it means is in that area of the brain is where fear dominates and our fight or flight response is triggered. And it's there that we form tribal identities. My tribe is always right. We're never wrong. The other tribe is always wrong. And all that's in the amygdala. And when they were doing all that research politically, they also found that's where the brain processes religious thought. And they do that by putting people in MRI machines and then give them a stimulus politically or religiously. And that's the part of the brain that lights up. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, no wonder the spirit of politics and religion are dancing. They were formed together in this arena in which fear dominates. And I think of how much of my religious past and religious heritage springs from fear. Fear of hell, fear of missing out on God's blessing, fear of not doing enough for God. Fear was a dominant part of our religious upbringing here in the States. The fear of hell, 200 years ago, we decided that was the best evangelistic message, scare people to death, and you're going to come love a God who wants to burn you if you don't get it right. And so all of that, it just made sense that these two were being so fused together by darkness because it wants to control people and it wants to polarize us. It wants to set us against each other. And so I began to think, well, then where's faith processed? If religion and politics is in the amygdala, what about faith? And every time I'd try and research faith in social science terms, faith is religion and religion is the amygdala. And it always goes back there. And I'm thinking, no, I don't mean that. I don't mean religious performance. So I started finding other words like transcendence, the awareness that there's a God in the world bigger than me. So where's transcendence? Where is trust? Where is empathy, compassion? And those things all went to the prefrontal cortex, which is a whole different center of the brain. And people who live by a lot of fear, their amygdala is disproportionately large. And people who learn to live in love, compassion, their prefrontal cortex is larger and the amygdala is not so big, it shrinks. And so I've been exploring. A friend of mine is got his master's degree in counseling and psychology. So we've been really talking about this together, looking at it together. And he's come up with even some further stuff as to how this affects our ability to even understand truth. That if we're triggered by fear, then when truth comes and God's trying to invite us into a way of living loved, our brain can't even process it until God gets to rewire stuff. I remember coming back to Sarah after one of my conversations with Kyle. And I said, you know what? 25 years ago, when God began, and it was through a very painful incident, but God began to invite me out of religious ways of thinking. I really thought it was about finding a different way to do church. And when I was doing this research, it was like, oh my goodness, it was so much bigger than that. It was God wanting my brain to be able to wrap itself around empathy and trust and transcendence, which are all new covenant values. It's not that the Old Testament didn't hint at it, because I'll be your God and you will be my people. I mean, it's inviting us into that relational engagement, but Israel couldn't see it. And God, most of the Old Covenant is addressed through the amygdala. It's addressed through that fight or flight, fear. If Deuteronomy is all that. If you don't do what I tell you to do, I'm going to whack you. And if you do, I'll bless you. And it all appeals to that tribal instinct, that fight or flight response, that wanting to be comforted at any level. I want to find out anything that lets me feel comforted, even if it's false comfort, but we usually don't know that it's false comfort. And I've been so grateful that God invited us on a different journey for reasons I couldn't fathom. And that I live now in a different space. I'm able to ask questions and process things and love people that are unlike me in ways that people who stayed in the religious environment I grew up in can't, seemingly. And it hasn't made me feel superior to them. It's just made, God, I'm so grateful that you began to unwind that in my heart 25 years ago, and still unwinding it. Still that process is going on. But it's really helped to see that old covenant amygdala is one thing, and Jesus comes to invite us into a different way of relating to God through transcendence and trust and love, and then live that love out in the world would be the way we'd be transformed, not out of fear. So that's how nuts I am. Or nuts God's making me. How about that?
Thanks for sharing that, Wayne. I'm going to let that set for a bit, and you might have some questions or some thoughts coming up around that. And part of it, when you begin to see this, some of you may have read Denise Jordan's book called Forgotten Feminine. And it was the first book I read many years ago when I walked into that first Father Heart week. And I've told this many times, but I turned to my wife and I said, if this is what I think it is, this is going to change everything. And that was code for it was going to change me. And I just wanted it to happen quicker. I remember literally going, how do I get this? How do we get this into all these people that I've given my life to serve? And how can we get there? And I didn't realize I was going to have to be, you have to be the change that you want to see. You know, you can't give away what you haven't received. You may try and convince somebody of it, but that doesn't work. It's going to have to come out of you, literally him coming through you. And I just remember this moment of, and this is where Wayne's book was just, I had just gotten that before that. And that last chapter all of a sudden made a ton of sense to me, that this is going to take some time, not because God is slow, but we've had a mentality sometimes, wave the magic wand and I'll become a loving person overnight. Or the degree that I know love now must be the epitome of what it is. And yet we know the verses, you know, can't even hope or imagine all that he has in store for you. You know, there's so many works he has stored up for you in advance, you know, that in advance he's prepared these things. And there's just so much. But I didn't understand. And I came out of that world where I was a self-proclaimed atheist, if you will, agnostic. And I lived from my mind, but I didn't understand how, what you just described, Wayne, but this comes out in Denise Jordan's book, that even the autopsies that were done on the Columbine shooter and other people that have gone on mad rampages that have no apparent compassion, how could they do that and not feel even a stitch, if you will, of empathy or guilt, or what's going on in that? And they found just what you said, the frontal cortex of the brain that grows as you experience and grow in love and empathy. As it comes at you, you experience it, and that translates into your, if you will, into your living body, and eventually coming out of you in your actions and words. But the autopsies that were done showed these frontal cortexes were quite small, if very limited. And you look back at some of the reality of what produces or causes people to live more from that amygdala, if you will, from that place when triggered. And it's one of the things that has absolutely rocked me in my latter years here, to say this is why being transformed by his love and living loved and continuing to do so is, and I just throw it out there, is God's answer to the entire, you know, shooting match. And if it was change the systems by just, you know, mere mental energy, gosh, that would be, all we have to do is have intelligent people and let's get on with it. But boy, it doesn't work until we become the kingdom in us, if you will, that love. That's what it feels like. And I'm not there, but I was looking here. Barb, did you put a question, or you're just sharing something in here? Where are you, Barb? There you are. Why don't you share it? And Angela, if you can unmute Barb, go ahead.
Barb on here, so she just left a comment. So it might be a different Barb.
Oh, sorry. It just said Barb, so
yeah.
I don't know who's the other Barb. I don't know who it is. I see another Barb there, but I don't know who that is. Feel free to. But that's powerful, Wayne.
She's unmuted. She's trying to talk.
Okay.
Barb? Maybe not. Maybe her mic's not working, but she is unmuted.
That's
Her microphone's not working.
too bad. Is there a question? Oh, there is a question. I'll just read it. Or do you want to do it, Angela? You can.
Go ahead, Brent. I have a whole bunch of other ones that I'm ordering, so go right ahead.
Okay. Sorry. This is the first one I saw, so I don't mean to take your job. Fear has been huge for me all my life. This is from Barb. My family of origin was completely chaotic. Even now at late middle age, I continue to struggle in simply receiving the Father's love. At present, I believe God is working deeply in me to uproot and tear down intimidation and the fear of man. I also believe, like Wayne, I am being prepared for something. I feel spiritually pregnant. It has been a long journey of following God into hard places. In my current weariness, is there a way to help my brain rewire to be able to have a clear sense of God's love?
Yeah, Barb, first, my heart really goes out to you, man, to have that kind of environment where intimidation and fear was a major part. But man, you're not alone. There's so many people would say that, whether it was true in their family or true in the church they grew up in, or some of us grew up in maybe very legalistic cult type things where fear is where darkness rules. Fear is always where darkness rules because it puts us in that fight or flight mode. And some of that, fight or flight mode isn't wrong. Sometimes if you're in danger, you need to fight or flee. You need to do one of the two. So those are legitimate coping mechanisms in those kinds of environments. And I love that you see God rewiring all that. And I know, I think Brent was referring to this a little bit earlier, that this is a long process. Getting our brains wrapped around love instead of our fears, and particularly those directed at God, is a long-term process. And I don't know how the question about rewiring my brain, or has there a way to help my brain rewire. I'll be honest. I think that's above my pay grade. I haven't rewired my brain. I haven't. I just don't even begin to know. I think what has most helped me is learning to live inside that affection of the Father, having people around me and being in conversations, watching other people learn that is incredibly helpful to me. As I hear other people talk about the thing God's doing in them, the place where you said involves some very difficult places or hard places that you've journeyed into, that's often where we learn what love is, because it runs counter to everything in the world. The world operates on fear for the most part. And so when you're learning to live inside that love of the Father, man, people get threatened, particularly religious people. They'll get angry. They'll just attack you for being an easy grace person, whatever. So I don't know where the hard places are for you, but I know for me, when I started to lean into that space where God was revealing his affection and love to me, it was not natural. It wasn't easy. But I found having people around me and being in conversations with people who are exploring the same thing, like my recent conversation with Stefan from South Africa that opened further doors in my heart, or you mentioned Kevin Smith from Australia early on in this journey, which was really able to see somebody living inside that love and just watching their example. It's not so much hearing teaching about it, because the teaching's easy to agree with, but it's the change of heart and that intuitive thinking that isn't so much a construct of, okay, I'm going to try to imagine I'm loved. God, I must be loved. I must be loved. And you're trying to white knuckle it. But it really is the growing piece that comes from seeing that God has your back, that God is for you, not against you, that he is in your circumstances to accomplish wonderful things. Doesn't mean he causes them. I don't think God causes disasters so he can train us, but disasters happen because we live in a broken world. So there's plenty for God to have access to that can help us learn to live differently. And I think it just comes from keep leaning into that space where I find myself leaning into fear, I find some time over here to begin to lean out of fear and lean into love. And times when I've got to make a choice, am I going to do what I'm going to do because I'm afraid if I don't, I'm going to lean away from that decision. I'm going to say, what would I do if I knew God loved me and would care for me? What would I do? And so it's a constant process of leaning this way and leaning out of that. But sometimes we're in this fear mode without even knowing it. We just got caught up, and fear can be anxiety. It can be a lot of things. We just get caught up in it. And when you realize it's when you stop, and like the prayer Brent mentioned earlier, Father, what is it about your love I don't know that if I knew it, I could trust you with this? And that's just an ongoing journey that fellowship really helps. Reading really helps. Find people who are saying the things, or podcasts or whatever, that are saying the things that resonate deeply with your heart and its desire to live in God's love, and just let those things wash over you. Don't go nuts like listen 50 hours a week or anything, but just find ways that is reinforced in your heart instead of the fear, particularly of other people.
Great. Angela, got another?
Well, I have a smorgasbord of questions
Okay.
that could dwindle the crowd or could make the crowd stay. I'm not sure. I'll start with some softball ones, and then we'll go to like BLM.
Good. You're my favorite person already. Start with easy stuff.
So, and if I read your question and I don't capture the heart of it, please feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you from there. First question is, I had a friend send me one of your podcasts a while back about religious scaffolding of the heart. I wish I knew the number so I could tell you how many years ago it was, Wayne. But the question is that you mentioned that you can now tell when you're doing it, scaffold. So you might have to give some context for people. Scaffolding your heart, or when others around you are scaffolding the heart. Could you mention some tall tale signs of when I am scaffolding my heart or when others are scaffolding their hearts? And then they added context, religious scaffolding.
Yeah, I think I don't remember the podcast. So, but it sounds like something we would get into. I suspect someone else got us in there, and I just joined them because I found it fascinating. I think by scaffolding, what I would think of today when I'm thinking about it is it would be the artificial things that we do to try to protect ourselves or give us some structure that we'll think we'll find security in. And scaffolding isn't always wrong, particularly if we replace it. Scaffolding, if you're trying to paint your house and you got a tall house, scaffolding's a good idea, right? Or if you're building a house, scaffolding is a great idea. It's a temporary structure meant to help something happen. Or think of it as a cast if you broke your leg. A cast, if you broke your leg, cast is a helpful thing. If you're still wearing the cast 5 years later because you've become dependent on the cast rather than let the leg heal, then that's a problem. So the scaffolding to me is just the artificial things that give me a false sense of security, but actually kind of diminish my connection with God because I'm putting my dependence somewhere else. So I notice it in my heart when I'm finding my comfort in things rather than Him. Like the thing might be certainty about the outcome of an event. That when I think I have certainty about it, and so I'm comforted because I think I know how this turns out, that to me, that's a little bit of scaffolding. I don't always know how my circumstances will turn out. I rarely know. In fact, I'm almost always wrong about how I think my circumstances will turn out. So it's finding my trust in not the certainty of an event, but the certainty of my Father's affection that no matter what event unfolds, no matter what tragedy comes my way, it's a door into some other reality that God's going to use to open a door to my heart. And so it can get stomped on, abused by other people, but God's opening a door for me to find freedom from that. And so scaffolding to me is when I'm doing a lot of things for God that aren't growing my internal security in Him. So they're substitutes. That's how I would think of scaffolding. Does that make sense?
Sure does.
Mm-hmm.
Now I asked them if they could send the podcast number so other people can reference it.
Well, we didn't number all of them. We only started numbering after we got up to 300 and some odd crazy thing. And then we thought, well, we better keep these straight with numbers instead of titles. But we didn't go back and renumber them all.
If you could send the link, that whoever asked that question, that would be awesome. So other people who want to listen to that can. This is an easy one. Do you have any resources on the brain amygdala stuff that you would be willing to share with us? Like document wise?
Well, I have the raw research that the first person sent me. The friend I'm talking to, Kyle, is writing a paper on it that we're gonna do a podcast on it when he gets the paper done, so people can access that. So, I mean, I could send out that. It's just a raw sheet of some links and some things that got me thinking, but it's only on the political, religious side. I didn't tabulate all the research I was doing on the transcendence and faith and that side of it. So, but yeah, I'm happy to share those links. I don't know how or where or when or where I'd find them at the moment, but I could send them to somebody if somebody could send them out to other people.
You could send it to, we can connect, Wayne, and then we'll put it on our web with a post. So if you're asking for it and you can go to the UChurch.
Well, it's fairly lengthy. I could put it into the chat, but it's fairly lengthy. I don't know if you want that much
would
in
be
the chat.
little.
You could email it to Brant, and Brant can.
Okay, I will email it to Brant even as we speak.
I will hunt Brant down. I know all the access points. Email.
She knows my weaknesses.
Phone number, receipts. Track it down. Here is a lighthearted question. What is your favorite thing about journeying with Sarah in this revelation of Father's love together?
Oh my gosh. I'm enjoying right now not flying anywhere else in the world. We get to be together every day, which is, I'm kind of enjoying the COVID hunkering down stuff. What I most enjoy is having somebody who thinks so differently than I do. And when we trip over things like that garden thing, and there's been a number of things where Sarah's just kind of spilled into something, and just the simple way of life unfolds. I'm always into reading theology and thinking through lots of things, listening to things. Sarah learns just a lot in life, and she is the most gracious person I know. In fact, was overly gracious at one point because she wasn't being true to her. She was just serving everybody around her, and that sounds wonderful unless you're doing it out of an area of bondage where you're trying to earn everybody's approval. So you're doing whatever anybody else wants. And to watch her process that with God and come out of it, because, she's the most selfless human being I've known, like I've said, almost to a fault. I am probably one of the more selfish human beings that I know, that God has been unwinding me. So we come at this from two very different starting points. And that leads to a lot of fun in watching what she discovers and then seeing things I discover that just really finds resonance in her heart, but from a different perspective. So, yeah, in our case, opposites really married in a lot of ways. But we have found that a joy.
That's so cool to hear. Here's another hopefully fluffy one. Is making small moment-by-moment decisions more fruitful in your relationship with God than making a big declaration and walking it out?
Yeah, I wouldn't make a big declaration and walk it out. I mean, the only one I would make would be the one that's part of, repent and believe, and God, I'm gonna put my whole trust in you, and I'm gonna follow you. That one that song we used to say. This one's funny because I look at times where I think God has asked me to go, and it's not been popular in some quarters. And I think about the song we sang, which was, though none go with me, still I will follow. Remember that? Though none go with, we sang that. And I always thought, that is a great, yeah, God, I'm going to do that stuff. And then, so God says, well, you've only asked me to do that. You asked me over and over again, though none go with me, still I will follow. So I'm just taking you up on it. So I don't make declarations and go, because I don't think I know God's mind very well. I tend to stumble into it. So I'm more willing to wake up every day and say, God, what do you want to show me today? What are you teaching me today? Who are you giving me to love today? That's kind of where my life is, rather than New Year's resolutions, or I'm going to decide to do this from now on. And do that's not how I'm wired to live. I used to do that. I used to be a type A, heavy on willpower because I was good at that, but it didn't change me internally. It only shifted things externally, which made the internal even angrier and frustrated, that I still had thoughts that I thought I had earned my way out of, but I had not. So if that's what you're asking, no, I'm not a big declaration guy. I'm much more of a, what are we doing today, God? What are you wanting me to know? How are you asking me to live? How do I follow you today? Is that what you're asking? Is that close?
Sure. I'll just say yes for the person
Well,
who
thank you.
perhaps
Yeah.
is asking, since I can't see their face at the moment.
Yeah, I don't see anybody else but me right now, which is just horrifying.
I can change it for you.
You can
I see a
change.
few. I see a few across the top, but that's it. But yeah, you can do spotlight me if you want.
I'll unspotlight you. There we go.
Thank you.
You're
Now
welcome.
I got Brent in big screen. So I'll go to gallery over here.
I'm looking at this one.
Is there a healthy way to talk about politics in a church setting? Have you written a book about that?
Have I? Yeah. I did with two other people, called A Language of Healing for a Polarized Nation. I would say in this day and age, it depends on the church. If the church is of one mind because only one mind is allowed to function, you can talk about politics. If it's people who don't see things the same way, this is a very dangerous time to have a healthy conversation that's not facilitated by somebody that people trust. Because people have put their political views online with their religious faith in that whole fight or flight thing and tribal identity thing that we talked about. So the question could easily be, is there a safe way to talk about in a family? And the answer is, it depends on the other people. If they can have a conversation and have respect for each other beyond their differences, that's the place to have that conversation. If having that conversation makes people angry and question your faith, that's one thing mentioned in the post I did. People were writing me off from the faith because I didn't fall into the Trump camp in a way they wanted me to. So then that's not safe. But it's okay for me because I don't care. You're judging my faith doesn't change my faith or my identity in God. Now that's a different Wayne than if you'd have met me 20 years ago. But right now, people wrote me all kinds of private. Oh, Wayne, I'm so sorry. I hate the way these people train. Hey, don't worry about me. It doesn't land anywhere. That's why I don't mind having these conversations with anybody. But if you shut down and yell at me or interrupt me, or you're going to try and convince me, I'm not trying to convince you. So if you're trying to convince me, then I'm going to probably find a way to back out of that conversation because it's not going to be helpful. What we encourage in the book, Language of Healing, is a kind of a growth mentality. If we really believe that none of us have a market on everything that's true, then every conversation I've had, I'm still looking for what might God show me in this that would adjust my way of thinking. And when we stop doing that, when we already have all the truth we need, and so I judge people based on whether they're inside my parameters or not, what you know is you've stopped growing. You've stopped being able to look at things and go, I definitely take that to God and see if there's some truth there. And there may not be, but I'm open enough to think about it because I think that's important to being a growth-minded person. I haven't got it all figured out. So someone compared it recently to like if a young girl, she talks to teenage girls a lot about sexuality. She says, so I have a teenage girl and she tells me about her dreamy boyfriend that she met 6 months ago. And he's just great. And she just makes her feel so loved and everything's wonderful. And then, well, one night he yells at her, just gets really angry and yells at her and she gets scared. But the next day she's always saying, well, he's my dreamy boyfriend. So, it's just a bad night, no big deal. And then sometime he hits her. And well, it's my dreamy boyfriend. I mean, he just had a bad night and then he cheats on her. And if you don't let ongoing facts change your perspective, you've stopped growing. And I think that's she encourages young women, hey, when you have new information about your love, let that help you determine what kind of person he is. Don't just ignore it. because it just might have been a bad moment. You got to really figure out what kind of character you're with. And I think that's true of just about everything in life. I'm still learning, I'm still growing, and I do not mind being able to say to somebody, you know what, I used to think this way and I don't anymore. I think this is where God's brought more truth into my heart.
The book is really good for those who need to know the language of healing. Healing a Polarized Nation, right?
Yeah, and one of the things we talk about is don't try, when you're in a convince mode, communication has ceased to happen. So even when you, and I think this is true, when you most know you've got the truth, you're the less interested in forcing it on someone because you know they have to recognize it, not have it forced on them. And the more you force truth on people, the further they get away from it because we get defensive and we push back. And so when you're in convince mode, or if somebody's in convince mode with you, now Jesus said, look, I'll send the Spirit. He will convict or convince, the word's right there, the world of sin, righteousness, and judgment. That's not our job. It's Holy Spirit's job. We're lousy convincers. We're good lovers. He's asked us to love, and that'll provide the conduit for the Spirit to convince.
With that, because I know you talk about this in the book with Anita, is I'd be interested to hear what Wayne would have to say around Black Lives Matter and the issues of race and race occurring in the world and in the church right now.
Well, I can't speak about it from the world because I don't know where every corner of the world and how we're dealing with it. I think overall we can clearly say in American life that people of color have less access to the ladder of success or the ladder of opportunity in our culture. That we have a horrible national past of slavery, and we have an ongoing, since we ended slavery, have an ongoing, particularly in the South of the U.S., where blacks are treated as second-class citizens, and we've kind of passed the laws to kind of help that not be true, but we haven't won it in all the human hearts yet. So, yeah, I think it is a problem. I think we haven't figured out how to address it yet. I think it's true of all people of color in white preferring cultures, which is, and I don't mean, I know people go into white privilege and they get all into guilt and, I didn't do anything. I don't want to be blamed. Just stop a minute and say, do I have advantages? If I'd grown up black in America, would I have had less advantages than growing up white in America? And I think obviously I would have had less. And now what do we do about that as a society, as a culture? How do we make room for people who are historically disparaged and mistreated and suffered prejudice and disadvantage? How do we deal with that? I mean, our country, I forget what the number is of black men who fought in World War II who came back, and we made sure they couldn't get the GI Bill for some reason. I wasn't alive back then, but they couldn't go to college on the government, and they couldn't get a home loan, a VA loan, like white people could. So if you're a white soldier, comes home and you go to the GI Bill and go to college and you buy a house for your kids and that appreciates, now you've gotten a historic advantage on someone that was left out just because of the color of their skin. That's the only reason they were left out. And so there's a lot of inequities. There's a lot to still be done in our culture. At the same time, I think, and this will get me in trouble, I'm sure, I think Black Lives Matter as a sentiment. Black lives do matter, and they don't always matter the way they should. That's really critical. Black Lives Matter as an organization is heavily Marxist, and I think doesn't understand the language of healing. I don't think they're inviting people to understand with them, and I can understand why they wouldn't. They've tried that for generations, and they've been ignored. So I understand the angst behind all that, particularly the Black friends of mine that I know. I understand the angst of we've been trying to get this right for 150 years, and society and so now it's because of the polarized environment in it, it's very angry, and we're going to force it down people's throats. And I don't think that's helping them. I think there's more people now in America willing to listen to this and make substantive changes. But at the same time, there's enough rancor on the extreme parts of the left that make it difficult for conservatives to cooperate sometimes because it's more about guilt. It's keep people accosting the street. If you don't get on your knees and apologize for racism in our country, or if you're not anti-racist, that makes you a racist. I mean, there's lots of things being said right now in the angst of the pain of the Black experience. That's, maybe helping them cathartically get it out, but it's not helping us have the conversation that will heal it and make a difference. Not yet. But I realize their patience runs thin when young Black men are killed for just having an engagement with a police officer. I mean, I get it. I get the fear of parents. I get the frustration of a Black community that says it's just not fair that this keeps happening. And yet many of us who come from law and order type backgrounds, you're always willing to give the police the benefit of the doubt. And sometimes that means you're justifying something bad that happened, not necessarily because the cop was a bad guy, but he got in a situation in which he got afraid and he resorted to violence too quickly because the person was Black. They might not have if the person had been white, or being in a neighborhood in which there's a higher fear level than not. And I think that's just the mess our society needs to sort through. But I don't think we have found the way to do that well yet, unfortunately.
Then Wayne, the other Wayne has his hand raised. So
I don't know where he is, but okay.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna unmute him because it's Wayne Headley.
He's our LA guy, right?
Yeah, the LA guy. Wayne, I can't see your face, but I'm gonna ask you to unmute. I can't tell.
Yeah, it's all right. Hi, how you doing?
Where are you down here in LA, Wayne?
I'm in the valley.
Oh, you are? You're not that far.
I'm in the valley. I'm not that far.
We gotta get together sometime.
That would be wonderful.
I'd love it.
That'd be wonderful. Yeah.
Come
It's that finding anybody and getting out of your house, as you know, in LA right now, is it takes serious consideration.
Well, we have people come over and sit in my backyard. We can look at that garden back there.
No, I like that idea.
10 feet apart, and we can talk and be as safe as we can be.
Brother, I'm going to make a date. I'm going to take you up on that. Cool. It's interesting because obviously I get cornered a lot on the question of Black Lives Matter and all those things related to it. People sort of get it all confused when they talk about the nonviolent struggle of the civil rights movement and today's struggle of Black Lives Matter. Two different movements with different spirits, different intentions. You listen to a lot of the speeches of Dr. Martin Luther King, and you just don't hear what you hear in the rhetoric of Black Lives Matter today. And so when people try to join the two of those as one force, it's like oil and water as far as I'm concerned. And I think there's many of us who are believers who see that, and we get to speak to it because we're individuals of color. We often have to say to them, are you really aware of what Dr. King said? Do you really understand the spirit with which he spoke, the power, the anointing? It didn't involve the anger. Not that wasn't there. You just had to move over to Malcolm X at the same time, and you would have found the same kind of individual dealing with the same same circumstances, but having a very different approach to it. So once again, there's not really been a voice like Dr. King's in this present time, but that doesn't mean that spirit of Dr. King and the resolve to heal this nation through nonviolent means and a just society and equity for all doesn't exist. There's just many who just see that if the only path to that is to join forces with Black Lives Matter, then their voice will remain silent. So just an observation from someone who's in LA and probably in our day, would the opportunity be given us, Wayne and I would be linked arms at the front of some kind of a march and would probably be speaking the same language. So that's my thought.
Probably would, Wayne. What I love about what you shared, what it illustrates is how, if we're going to find some healing, it's how we talk to our own tribe. I've got to talk to white people in a way that will engage them in the understanding of the struggle. And then you're going to say things that to the Black community that may not be what they want to hear. I mean, just particularly the angry ones who just want to go at it and fight. And I love that sometimes if we're going to find healing, there's got to be bold people in the tribe that doesn't necessarily have the tribal line, but has the larger goal in mind of let's make society fair, equal, and just for all of us. We're not there yet, but let's find a good way to do it, not a hurtful way. So yeah.
Sorry, Angela, I muted myself, and I'd have to unmute myself again. But you're exactly right. I've said it to many people. I've been in scenarios where I've spoken as a Black man to an audience with. I've brought along a friend who's white or not a person of color. And at the end of the end of the sermon, all the young Black men are lined up in front of that person for a hug. And I'm like, what about me? And it's just amazing. The spirit of reconciliation, when someone walks in that spirit, it just doesn't. It has such a disarming effect on racism and discrimination, and that's what I don't think people see enough. But I've been there. I've witnessed it. When someone walks in the spirit of reconciliation, it's a very, very different reception that they receive when the spirit breaks through to a person's heart than if you come with something that is, settled in the mind, and you're trying to convince somebody of an argument. When the Holy Spirit goes to work on a person's heart, that spirit of reconciliation could come from anyone and be delivered in any manner. And when it's received, that person's life is changed. So, again,
I love
I'm
that.
just saying amen.
Wayne, get my contact details from Brent, would you? Get in touch, because I
Love
would love to hang out with you. I'd love
That'd be fun. That'd be fun.
It.
Thanks, guys.
And Jamila?
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to add a few thoughts to that, because one of the things, I guess maybe more as a parent of two biracial boys, is I get concerned about language of us and them, right? I really have been going to a place of family within the family of God. And there's a deeper place within the family of God where we're not defined so much by these earthly temporal identities, such as skin color, right? And I know that sounds naive in this atmosphere, but I've really been so drawn to the knitting together of the body, as one body, rather than using a language of earthly language like black and white. And I get it. I know why we use that language here, but I think as a body, my heart, I guess, is for us to go to a place where we really have one Lord, one Spirit, one body, and we function in that. And I know that sounds naive, but I don't think it is, because I feel like we're moving into that place in the Spirit, particularly as a family where we are truly we belong to each other, one to another. And I think if one part of the body hurts, the other part of the body hurts. And I think rather than thinking in terms of how the world has conditioned us to think, in terms of political camps or ethnic and racial identities, those things matter in the sense of they matter on earth, but they don't matter in the spirit. I think God uses it where he uses it to unlock different things to different groups, but ultimately we belong one to another. And that's the only thing I wanted to add to that conversation.
That's awesome. And obviously that's the goal. The goal is just melanin in skin. That's all it is. But if we think that skin color defines character, then it's what ruins us. It's ruined us to have that conversation. I'm one with you there. I want to see that happen. I do.
It's when we think of the critical nature of it and different perspectives and different stages of life. I think it's just we're just in this incredible time. I know, Wayne, you've referred to this in a conversation. I heard you say it recently, but there's a perception, I think, that Christians in general. I'm not talking about just the Christian, that broader sense of the term, but those who are, following my good friend Wayne. Wayne's been my best buddy for years. And how do we, well, this is a conversation Wayne and I have many times, but the question oftentimes is you can't necessarily come up with a carte blanche, everybody, do this, because everybody's at different stages of their journey in their heart. And Jamila, you referred to it really wisely, in just the sense that it's quite a interesting time, and everything's coming to the surface, and a lot of emotions about it. And I was just recently catching up on what's his name, Thurman, and some of his writings from the 1930s and 40s. He was Martin Luther King's mentor, if you will. And when I read some of the stuff that he wrote, it's just incredible. And but how everything that he wrote was just buried. It's full of gospel of the Father, that the whole language, and yet the church has never had a chance, generally speaking, to be able to know how to navigate that. And each country has a different thing. But have you found, like, I find lots of people online that are having wonderful conversations, but they're, with conversations, like you said earlier, with people that have an ability to not react, but to have an ability to discuss it. Is there any wisdom that you would pass on related to that? That would be for people who want to pursue and grow in this, or resources in that. I think that's one of the things, even in your book that Angela is referring to from last year, finding language. Sometimes we find ourselves as believers in that place, not knowing how to go there. And we, it's not been a training. Some people think that's the job to someone to train everybody to know how to do that. But I find it's something that you're in your own journey to learn about and go after. But anyway, those are just some thoughts, but I was more around the question of, like, Howard Thurman. I'll just read a couple of his quotes that really struck me recently. But anyone who permits another to determine the quality of his inner life gives into the hands of the other the keys to his destiny. One of the ones, I think he said this in the 1950s. If a man knows precisely what he can do to you, or what epithet he can hurl against you in order to make you lose your temper, your equilibrium, then it can always keep you under subjection. And then he says, Jesus rejected hatred because he saw that hatred meant death to the mind, death to the spirit, and death to the communion with his Father. He affirmed life, and hatred was the greatest denial, or was the great denial. And when you said something, when Jesus quotes Hosea, can you expand on that one? That when he says, Hosea talking about, I look for mercy, not sacrifice. We know that another place says mercy triumphs over justice, but how does mercy and sacrifice work? Can you unpack that just a little bit? Because I think this is going to be an important thing going forward in the days ahead, and having these conversations, and in the next year or two, it's going to be important.
Yeah, let me go back and quote Yoda first, because I think Yoda offers us some really good stuff here. Phantom Menace, he says, about darkness growing in one of the people, he says, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. And I could draw biblical lines to that same reality, and mental health lines, that fear, when I'm afraid of something, I'm going to end up being angry. And when I'm angry, I'm going to end up hating the substance of that anger. So when I meet somebody who's angry or hateful, what I realize is they're afraid of something. There's something they're afraid of. And that fear may have gotten lost a long time ago. If I'd ask them, what are you afraid of? They probably wouldn't even know, because it's been so incarnated into their experience. So mercy triumphing over justice, or come and learn this, what I want is mercy and not sacrifice, is really the heart of love. Really does turn the tide in any situation we're in. If I can disconnect myself enough from how I want to react to someone's anger or how I want to react to someone's hatred, and find a way to love them. And just even, I mean, that may take a while. Just go, God, how do I love here? How do I love? And let God carry that with you for a season and find ways into that kind of dialogue, I think is really, really critical. But it's difficult because I think particularly if we're still talking about racial kinds of things, there's definitely people who have been victimized by the actions of others. So there's people who've had advantages and people who haven't had, who have been disadvantaged, sometimes intentionally, sometimes just inadvertently. And so what you would say to those groups of people depends on who you are. I'm not going to try and instruct people that have been victimized by things that would give me impetus as a person who never has been victimized at that level. So I think it's a matter of how do we learn to love? And right now, what we encourage in Language of Healing, because it's about changing the world one conversation at a time. It's not about Washington or Ottawa or what our leaders should do to fix things. It's really about how do I befriend a person who's different than me, whether it's racially, religiously, politically. How do I find relationships with people, and in those relationships find a way to hear their story, understand their story, not argue with their story. Arnita, we did a call last night. We're working with a church in Michigan that is about half black, half white in Detroit. And they've asked if we'd come alongside them for a few weeks span. And Arnita says, I'm constantly asked to speak for all black people. I don't speak for all black people. I can only speak for what I see. But sometimes I share my story, and white people want to argue with me. They want to invalidate my story because my story makes them uncomfortable. And they feel guilt or they feel anguish. And she said, I'm not sharing it so you'll feel guilt or anguish. I just want you to hear my story. Knowing Arnita, and I've only known her over the last couple of years. I met her really 1 week before we started working on this book together. And it was kind of a God thing that brought us together. But knowing Arnita, and she said that I and Bob, the other co-author of the book, are the first 2 white men she's ever talked about race with, her racial experience, where she's got one of the most healthy views on race and conversations with people who are white that are incredibly healing and wonderful. But she said it's just so often that people can't let me have my story. They've got to argue me out of it. And just knowing her has changed the way I relate to almost everybody in my life, not just black people, but people who have a different experience than me. Because we want to somehow take the conclusions from our story and force them on everybody when everybody doesn't have our story. Even other white people don't have our story. And so you let people have their story. You help find God in the midst of it. You love each other. And that's where we'll find ways to converse better. And if we find relationships that matter, then you're going to care about people and we'll find the right things to do in the culture. But until it's not just a fight between this issue versus that issue, and it's nameless, faceless people because it's issues, I think we'll fight forever. And I hope we find a way to have, and I think one of the best ways is to get to know people. To walk into a room, when we get to walk into rooms again, it's been a long time, right? But when you walk in a room, not just gravitate, as we all naturally do, we just gravitate to the people who look like us or the people who think like us. I don't want to go over there with a liberal because I'm not sure what I'd say, or I might say something offensive and I'm not even trying to be offensive. And we've gotten so scared to have these conversations. But I've discovered is we can have them. We can, even if we're, say, hey, I don't mean to be offensive, but can I ask you something? And if it is offensive, will you tell me? That just shows you've got some social consciousness, that you're not just going to be a bull in the china shop, but it will allow you to get to know people. When you get to know people's stories, you'll love them. You'll care about them. And when you care about them, you'll care about what they face in society that you don't face. And is there a way to fix that? And if there is, let's do it. And I think there is.
So good. The comments are coming in. Go, Wayne, go.
Rock on, Wayne. I don't rock.
Yeah, there you go. Rock on.
Old. Yeah, I'm old. But thanks, Christine. Nice try.
before there might be some other questions, but I just make a comment here. I know for one of my last roles that I had in the corporate environment was the manager of Aboriginal Affairs for our company across our nation. I had about 27 staff, and many of them were First Nation staff, and they lived across Canada. And I remember our senior VP, that was one of my mentors at that time, and we didn't name it the way now that's getting named, but it was how do we cross these boundaries in a particular situation and help a company, if you will, a group of people start to see, people for people, not for any limitations. And I remember I tell people the second most emotional time in my life was us doing a pilot program that we rolled out to 6,000 staff eventually, but we had to go through it first, and we had a professor from Winnipeg come, and he said exactly what you said. This is what triggered the memory. He said, as Anita was sharing, he said, I'm going to share some stories with you that are not intended to elicit any type of emotional response, but they will cause you to feel emotionally, and you'll want to respond because you're going to feel guilty about it. Because you identify with something. And he began to tell these stories, and I was just my favorite story, just to summarize it, with the vice president of the biggest bank in Canada, had been through the same thing. And he stood up one point and said, "You're telling these stories just to get us to feel this and this and that and that." And he said, "You're just being manipulative." And he said, "No, but no, that's what I'm feeling. That's how I'm experiencing this." He said, "No, this was a seminar that you guys asked for to learn. And so learning is going to be a process of unlearning some of the things that you think you know." And then the big moment was one of the ladies stood up, who was an employee of the Royal Bank, who was a First Nations lady, lost all her children to the social services because of lifestyle and abuse, but she went through all the cleanup, went to university, and now she was looking to get her kids back, and they were, of course, lost in the system, and terrible tragedy stories. And as she told her true story in the midst of that meeting, this guy just, seek to understand before trying to be understood. He lost it, and he committed his personal resources to her to track down those children, the 3 children that ended up, one in Europe and a couple in the States, in pretty raw situations, to get them back to her. And I just want to emphasize what you just said, Wayne. My experience is I don't see it as much inside the church for some reason, only because I got insulated. But at one time we had 55 nationalities sitting in the pews of UChurch, and back in lots of students. And I can look back and think, man, I don't think we did anywhere near. I don't even think we scratched the surface of listening to stories. We were kind of like having the family reunion. You get together and, hey, look, we're all together, but you didn't really know what was going on, what they came through, and what they experienced. Yeah. And to be able to say, I can love you, is to say, I know you. Now, I can put love towards you, but loving you is to know you. And that's a commitment of time, and not about myself being uncomfortable, but putting myself in that place. And I would encourage all of us to be in that place in these next, this is probably the most exciting time and the hardest time, and all the words, all the adjectives for this time in human history for us. Nothing like this in our lives has ever been before us, like we're seeing. And this is not the time to hunker down and say, I know the truth and I'm going to batten down the hatches. I literally believe we can become childlike, and not childish, but childlike, and to enter this kingdom of how does the Father look at each of us? How does the Creator of all of us look at us and be able to speak those words to one another? That's healing. That's healing. And I look forward to those conversations, and it's a journey you can make. We can all do it. But yeah, powerful stuff. Powerful stuff.
So another question. These are 2 different things, but they were asked in the same question. What are your thoughts on the critical race theory and restorative justice, which are two different things. So we can separate them, or you can answer them together.
Yeah, and they're loaded words in the sense that those terms are used in different ways by different people. So I usually try to shy away from terms that I don't know that we all are using the same definitions of, because there's a lot that there's, like with anything, there's some interesting things in social justice theory. Is that what it was? Is that what you said it called it?
Restorative justice. But
that was the second one. What was the first one?
The critical race theory.
Oh, critical race theory. Yeah. We're helping. Arnita, Bob, and I are actually helping a college in Texas. It's in the most conservative county in the United States. 88% for Trump in 2016. That's how conservative this county is. And they want to do an anti-racist initiative at their college. And they want it to organically spring up. They don't want to impose a program from outside. They want us to help them identify places of inequity in their culture and then help them find solutions. And so we've kind of been involved doing that. It's an amazing exploration. I haven't read extensively on critical race theory. So I would hate to speak to specific parts of it. I know I've heard things about it that are so extreme. I just go, that's never going to work. That's never going to move us forward. There's going to be too much reaction to that. Other things about it, I think, are some awarenesses that people need to have that they don't have. So I'd have to get into that more detail by detail. Restorative justice to me strikes so close to God's heart rather than punitive justice. Restorative justice, it was practiced in South Africa after apartheid collapsed. I think is a model for the world. That, yeah, in some ways you have to go where racism or discrimination or harassment has caused historic inequities, whether it's with indigenous people, whether it's descendants of slaves here in America, or just the residual of the fact that slavery exists in America. Those things are the hardest things to deal with, those generational inequities. Look at the Middle East. We've been tit for tat in here so long that, we don't know who owes who what, but we're all going for vengeance every chance we get. And so these are really important issues that we don't address in the book because we think it's more important that we relationally connect and care. And then out of that, we'll have more of a sense of what we need to do. Academia, where some of this stuff like critical race theory comes out of academia, which is almost always weighted to theory and not enough on practicality. Stuff doesn't always work in the real world. And I'm all for how do we get to racial justice. I'm for that. And I'll do whatever I can to help in that process right now. So I'd have to say I'm mixed about them. I wouldn't give you a thumbs up, thumbs down on either one of them because I'd want to know what you mean by them first.
I love what you said, though, that it's about finding the relationships that matter and working it through relationally. I think that, one more on this topic, and then I'll jump to another hot topic. I'll go.
You become my least favorite person.
No, I'll do some fluffy ones for a while, and then I'll go. And then I'll go to the election questions.
Oh, great!
I was hoping people would dwindle down, and then maybe I wouldn't have to ask those yet. How would I have a conversation with a white supremacist in a loving way?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I don't know. I think these things happen inside a circumstance, inside what's exactly going on at the moment, and what insight the Spirit gives me that would bring love into the moment. One of the stories we heard from this college in Texas was a black man who's a nurse who comes on his shift and is given care of a white supremacist who's on his ward. And I mean white supremacy to the degree that he had white supremacy tattooed on his chest and he wasn't wearing a shirt. And when the nurse, he said, "Who are you?" And he said, "I'm your nurse." He said, "No, you're not. Get out of here." And he said, "Sir, I'm your nurse." And he walked over and said, "I'm your nurse. I've been assigned to help you, and I'm going to do everything I can to make your stay here as wonderful as it can be." And this guy was abrasive, and God kept giving him ways to respond to this man. And by the end of his stay in the hospital, like 3 days he was in there, and he had him over different days of shifts. He said that man finally said, "You know what? I still hate black people, but I really love you." And I know it's a horrible thing to say. It's just creepy as can be, but he found a way to love that guy because he could look past that. Now, our ability to do that's why you wouldn't say, okay, this is what we all need to do. Go find a white supremacist and just love them to death. I think that's just dangerous stuff. I think when we're in a circumstance and God gives us insight and we ask a question, we knock on the door, we see if there's an opening. If there's not an opening, I mean, I know white supremacists that I've talked to that I wouldn't talk to again without something happening in their heart that would change them. Now, I would love them if they needed gas in their car or they needed money for groceries. You call me, I'll help you. But I'm not going to talk to you about race until you have a heart that's ready, because they're so diluted that it's just not worth it for either one of us. But I would still look for a way to love, because remember, fear leads to hate, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate. So I unwind stuff by getting to fear. What are you afraid of? Because no one was born a white supremacist. We weren't born racist. Kids are not racist at young ages. We are taught that as kids grow. What happened in this guy's life that turned him into a white supremacist? And if I have a long-term relationship, I might see where that would go, but I wouldn't have a strategy going in other than, oh God, help me. What? Give me an insight. Give me something, and give me a way to love. So I just don't know if there is a way to do that other than let love win the circumstance. And I think that's true of most everything in our lives. I was talking to a young man the other day who's trying to figure out ministry and finances and all that kind of stuff. And he's got a 7-year strategy of something or other. And I said, you know what? I'll just be clear with you. None of my strategies have ever worked. I think God's will unfolds in us as we learn to live in that space of I'm relaxed because I know I'm loved. Now I can listen and see God's fingerprints and nudges in the circumstances I'm in. And then something I say, a question I ask, something they say, and I have a response. And then something magical happens from the Holy Spirit, because we've been ready in the moment to respond, not because we go into those encounters with strategies that we implement without thought to who we're with and where we're at. And then I always like to add this, man, when you talk about these kinds of things, never step outside your freedom. Don't force yourself into a situation you're not free to. It's not safe for you. Your trust in Jesus doesn't extend to yet. Don't force yourself into environments that extend you beyond your freedom. Live inside your freedom, not mine. You live inside yours, and that freedom will grow. If you try and live outside your freedom, you'll get knocked around, beat up, and you'll withdraw into a defensive posture, and you won't learn. So live where you're free to love, love. And where you're not free to love, don't make yourself do it.
Great answer. Here's a fluffy one. Earlier this week, I was having a conversation with a group of my friends about being his beloved and chosen. I was nudged by God afterwards to the last chapter of Living Loved in He Loves Me. It spoke to my heart. Without sharing too much, so not to give it away to others who have not read the book, it sounds so easy to live loved. My question is, why can it be so hard at times to truly live and feel as his beloved?
Oh, this is a fluffy question, is it?
Well, fluffier than the other ones that I've seen. Maybe not. When I say fluffy, I mean maybe not as polarizing as some of the other questions that have come in.
I'm just kidding you. I hear you. Yeah, why is it difficult? I think it's easier, and I think the enemy has a lot to do with this. I think being brutalized in the world has a lot to do with this. It's easier to believe that God's disappointed in me than it is to believe that I'm loved. The default mechanism of humanity, it's just easier to believe. Yeah, I know what's wrong with me. I know the bad thoughts I have. I know the things I do that are wrong. I know, so I get that God's disappointed with me. So when we're trying to follow him and we hear the voice like, you know what, Wayne, you're just not working hard enough. That seems like God to us. We believe that, but that's an accusation. And the enemy's the one who's the accuser of the brothers and sisters. So if we could get our eyes off of the accusing voice in us and know, hey, that's not God, that the voice that's inviting me in is, you are deeply loved. You are the delight of my eye. But God, I'm a mess. Yeah, I know you're a mess, but you're my mess and you're beautiful. And I want to work you through this. And in my conversation with Stefan, one of the things that we got into that I find really fascinating, this is a guy from South Africa, He said, I'm learning to love my imposter self. And learning to love your imposter self. What do you mean? He said, well, like flesh and spirit. I said, yeah, no, I get that. I get flesh and spirit and the natural man and the natural woman and the spiritual woman. And I said, I've learned to fight my natural man all my life. There's this war between flesh and spirit. And man, my natural man, I've been hating him my whole life. And he said, I'm just learning to love him. And he talks specifically about this part of his nature that always wants to be noticed, is always trying to get in the limelight, always trying to, was for a season trying to build a ministry, wanted to be the spiritual guru that everybody went to. And he said, I look back at him and I said, I know he got wired that way when I was young. My dad had some issues and he gets wired, and I need to be validated by other people's acceptance and wanting me and seeking me. And he said, I realize that's not who I am. That's not who I am when I'm loved. I said, but I'm learning to love that part of me. And I don't even know what you mean. So out of this conversation was simply, God loved me then. That's what he said. God loved me when I was that guy. It's love that won me out of that. So now when that guy crops up his head, I just go, I love you. You brought me experiences. You brought me to things I never would have known if I hadn't been following your stupid little antics. And I love you, but you know what? I can't wait until you're loved enough that you don't need the spotlight. And it's just, to me, I've had this conversation like 6 weeks ago. I'm still exploring that in my life. When I see that natural inclination come up and you want to fight it, I'm just going, you know what? I'm going to love that broken side of myself, which loving it doesn't justify it. It's not an excuse for it. It's none of that. It's just, I'm going to love that part of me until it's silent, instead of fight that part of me until it's silent. Because fighting it gives it power. And finding a way to love ourselves at our most broken. And what Stefan said was this, man, when you can love your broken self, you will find yourself loving broken people around you so much easier. So why is it difficult? Because we can't do it. God has got to teach us these things. And so all we're saying is, God, first of all, I think the prayer early on is, Father, would you show me your love? Would you show me how loved I am? I want to know. Just ask him. Watch how that unfolds in days to come. And then as you're learning that part of it, then it's like, okay, God, show me how that love begins to change my heart. And you're not going to see a process there. What you're going to notice is down the road, things that used to tempt you don't tempt you anymore. And that feeling of always believing the accuser and not believing God's encouragement will change. And now the encouraging words become easier to believe. But this is a period of time. I wish I could shorten it. I compare it to the astronauts when they're going from Earth to the moon. They're in Earth's gravity, and what it takes to spin out of Earth's gravity and break the hold of that. And even when they've broken the hold of that and they're on their way to the moon, most of the way to the moon, the gravity of the Earth is stronger than the gravity of the moon. Then they reach this point where, it's easier to get to the moon from here than it is to go back to Earth. And I see that in everybody's life. And if you're new to living loved, I would say relax. It takes probably 3, 4, 5 years to just get comfortable in the experience, in the trailhead, just there. And then when you are getting comfortable there, then as you continue to let that side of your life grow, then it'll become easier to believe you're loved than you're not. And you'll be in circumstances going, okay, God, I know you love me. I don't know how, I just know you do. And it's not necessarily a feeling. I don't look for feelings. I look for the reality in my heart, and it will come with feelings at times. But I'm not looking for this euphoric feeling of feeling loved. I'm looking for the quiet confidence of God's revelation and my settledness in who he is. But this takes a while because everything in the world has programmed us not to believe we're loved. And good people help. Get people around you that talk this way, because that'll help a lot. If that answers the question.
I think that was a great answer. I also really enjoyed listening to that podcast with, is it Stefan?
Stefan, yeah.
Yeah, with the South African accent, and he's unpacking his whole life and ministry. It's quite a beautiful podcast, part 1 and 2.
Yeah, and the audio is not good, so you really have to listen hard because
You do, and but his accent is worth it. It's so worth listening to.
And if you haven't heard it, it's the last 2 podcasts of the last year, so it's easy to find. Just go back to that year, 2020, last 2. So
They are really great podcasts. Okay, here's another one. In our Christian culture, there's this encouragement to have a routine or practice or of reading and being in the Word, praying daily, and this is considered the most vital in maintaining relationship with God. But in real life, relationship with other people seems to be more direct and interfacing, that we can ask questions, spend time with people, where we have some back and forth and we grow. I've wondered what kind of guidance there can be in relationship with God when we feel in our prayer and reading we are not receiving from Him. We can feel discouraged from spending time regularly in prayer and reading the Bible because we feel that the relationship is not developing. What can we do to hold space for God in practice where we can feel guided and feel good about the relationship?
you guys ever go to bed at night, or you just do this all night long? I don't know that there's an answer to that question that works for everybody. What I like about being on this journey is you've got to kind of feel out what's working for me. What am I being nudged to? What is God seemingly inviting me into that enhances this relationship? And what am I doing that's not enhancing it? So part of the frustration, I think, of the question you mentioned is I do this and it's not bringing me any closer. Then I would say, okay, something's wrong. Because if it's holding space, it's a great way to say it, I think, because the focus that said, I'm going to hold space for God every day in my life. Now, if a routine helps you, if it's getting up first thing in the morning and spending an hour, half an hour, 10 minutes, whatever, if that helps enhance your relationship, by all means, do it. If it doesn't, don't be condemned about it, because my relationship with Sarah, we've been married almost 47 years. I don't think my relationship with Sarah would have worked if someone gave us a prescription the day we met of how we're going to build our relationship. And we're going to sit down every day at the same time, and we're going to talk about these things. And she's going to read every Wayne Jacobsen book, and I'm going to probe Sarah's thoughts, and we're going to make it mechanical. I think the person who asked the question is absolutely right. Relationships are much more dynamic than that. And when you get it out of the religious construct of, well, if I do these things, God will come to me, that sounds like what we talked about earlier, the wrong kind of scaffolding. Because now I'm doing these things as a way to make God show up, or a way for me to feel His presence. And I would just say, hey, if you do those things and God's revealing Himself to you, fine. But look for even that to be somewhat dynamic. Look for that to change. My time with God has changed significantly over the course of my life. I make time every day to be undistractedly with Him. Some days that may be 10 minutes. Some days that may be an hour. I don't have a routine about it, but there's never a moment in my day when I'm not aware of Him and where I'm not looking for what wisdom He has, or I'm not talking to. I played golf today with some good friends of mine, and there's not a moment I'm walking down the golf course. If I'm with people, I'm talking to them. But if I'm alone, God and I are talking about stuff. What about this? And I've got, I got this problem in this problem relationship in my life right now, and I'd like to choke them. And I'm pretty sure that's not what you'd have me do. So God and I are talking about it. I'm trying to process His heart for that situation. So I just think it grows quite naturally. But without some intentionality that's not born of discipline and performance and earn it, some intentionality that's born of opening my heart to the relationship. I mean, Sarah and I can live together 47 years and never engage. We could, but we don't. We engage all the time. And there are times we both get busy where maybe we have to be a little more intentional because we're really busy. So, hey, let's sit down tonight and just check in how we're doing, and maybe we'll do that. But mostly it'll just come up normally in our life together, if that answers it. So there's not a good answer. These are things to kind of you and God sort out together, but be open to it changing over the course of your life. Something that may help now may become a bondage later, and just recognize where it ceases to be fruitful and then make an adjustment. Does that make sense? I compare that to the Canadian geese who fly north, and they're in that V formation. They don't go to V formation training school. They don't go to a lesson and they give a PowerPoint and tell you fly here, here, here. When I fly here and the other bird's there, this is easier because I'm drafting. They don't even know they're drafting. Just this is easier. When I get over here, that's not easier. So I just lean back into the space that's easy, and then they're smart enough to know, why don't we switch for a while so I get a break and you cut the wind. And that's how my journey with God goes. So what is being effective right now? That I'm leaning into. What wears me out and leaves me frustrated, I'm figuring there's something there that needs to change. So then God and I will talk about it. And I'll think about it for a while. And then I get an idea and I go, okay, maybe God's right. I'll try that and see. And it grows.
Awesome. There's a risk, Wayne, when you talk to this crew up here, the last time we did this Wednesday night before Christmas, some of us didn't get off until 1:45 in the morning.
Okay, well, I'm probably not going to journey with you that far.
Yeah, I know. I got a feeling you've already dropped some of those hints. So my thought is leave. I'm looking at.
I wasn't hitting. I just thought it was hilarious. How long? Yeah. A couple hours here.
Yeah. I can't see if Elaine is still on Montreal time. It's getting pretty late out on the East Coast out there.
Yeah, but rather than going till 1 a.m, we could definitely do it again sometime.
Yeah, that's what I'm leaning into. Leave them on and more.
Pressure. Yeah.
Yeah, and I already have just a sense in terms of some context about it. But there's something about these last few questions that really bring together a sense of what does it mean? Like I think of some of your books, especially that the wonderful So You Don't Want to Go to Church Anymore, but it's not the title of but what does it look like to live relationally with one another in this and continue in this? And as we all know, the normalcy of what a lot of people think Christianity is centered around, the whole Sunday idea that trumps relationship. Not that that's ever been said that way, right. But even in our city, we've had well-meaning pastors, make the front news paper. One specifically that just my heart went out to this guy. He says, we're going to break the law and we're going to do this because we can't obey God unless we meet. And I thought, and I don't know him yet, so I'm looking forward to get to know him and just find out the unpacking of that a little bit. And we got some pastoral meetings coming up. But the point, I'm not trying to bring that up as a tension point for some people, because everybody has a different context of that and it's all over the map. But the one thing that I think is very true, Wayne, that you've talked about so clearly in Naked Church and different things, is this journey isn't from big to small or styles to different styles, even going to house church. You've talked about that, where people can go to models, but it still doesn't get to the heart of really what communal connection is. And can I just leave that right now? And if you can capture something that would lead us to the next time we do this into that direction. But what would you see right now, given all the shaking that's gone on in religious structures, if you will, and things like that? It appears like it's making room for people to find that space with others and with God that's different than perhaps what they thought. I might be taking a risk here, but I don't think so.
Well, I think that where God's voice is in the pandemic, and I don't think God created it or God caused it, but where God's voice is now you have time to lean into me. You have time, you have space. And I know it's not hard. It's not easy for everybody, particularly if you're quite a social creature. Sarah's more of an introvert. She says, I thrive during a pandemic because I don't have to be out all the time. But that's not necessarily true of others. But this is a good time. And I think everything, what we read about in Hebrews, everything that can be shaken will be shaken. If this isn't an example of that, particularly if you live in America, politically, religiously, racially, medically, business-wise, income-wise, economy, everything that can be shaken is being shaken. And this is the time for hearts to just draw into who God is and find our security in him. I'm actually as hopeful as I've ever been that God is at work in the things that are going on to lead us into better spaces. And there's going to be lots of people come through this season having learned the difference between truth and error, having learned the difference between God's leading in their heart and their own selfish indulgence, having learned the difference between God's leading and their religious sensibilities. And I think that's happening. And I'm actually as encouraged as I've ever been that some wonderful things are at hand. And I realize there's always collateral damage of people who couldn't get through this because they were so invested in a structure they felt they needed, and that structure is no longer there, and it's going to. But I think even them, they'll come to a place where, as we said earlier from Hosea, we'll get to the end of the story of love. So yeah, now it may be very hurtful, it may be very difficult, very painful, but God's writing a story for each of us. I want you to know how loved you are, and the whole essence of our growth isn't never meant to be measured by what meetings we go to or don't go to. It's simply this: learn to live inside the love of God and learn to share that love with whomever God asks you to be near and puts around you. And that's all the growth we need. My goodness. That will challenge me for the rest of my life, because I still don't have a clue the depths of what love is. That's why my conversation with Stefan so opened up new doors in my heart, going, wow, this is even vaster than I know. And I'm all for that. So we're just scratching the surface of some realities that God wants to win the world with. And that's a good time to learn them. Great time.
Thank you so much, Wayne.
My pleasure. Thank you guys.
Yeah, it's been super wonderful.
I hope so. I hope it's been helpful.
Mm-hmm. We've gone, some of us got on at 9:25. That's walk in the park for us Canadians up north where we don't get sunshine for